minutes late.
All right. Sorry we're late.
15 minutes late, but we made it. We're
We're
here.
here.
We're
Hi,
gonna
guys. We're
do
here.
this show.
We're going to do this shit.
Now, Maya, I'm recording my voice. Are you recording your voice?
I am recording my voice as well.
Are you sure?
I'm positive. I see it.
Okay.
I see it on GarageBand.
Excellent. And I see mine on my thingy that I use.
All right.
So we should, therefore, get ready and do the show. I want to.
Hi, everybody.
Hi,
Nobody.
Hi, nobody. They'll join. Did you
If
tweet?
they do.
Did you tweet that we?
I did. I
live?
tweeted.
Okay.
I tweeted, and you should go and retweet it to your people.
I'm going to retweet it to my people right
do it.
now.
Tweet.
Retweet with comment.
La, la, la.
I'm live streaming.
I'm live streaming, bitches. Live streaming, bitches. We're live streaming, bitches.
Okay.
Okay. Hi, everybody.
Hi, everybody.
Hi,
All right.
everybody.
So, shall we start the show? Let's start this show.
Fuck yeah. Hi, I'm Maya Garantz.
And I'm Rebecca Cohen.
And this is The Sauce, the culture and politics podcast where we drink cocktails and ruin the stuff you love.
So, we're going to be ruining Black Lives Matter. No, not at all. But tell them
we're
what we're going to be talking about.
We're be talking about how our current understanding is informed and inflected by history and culture, more accurately, historical memory. Why is this moment seeming to be different? What media and culture prepared us for this moment to be different is what we're going to be talking about today.
Well said. Before we get into that, though, we got to check in. We don't do these regularly enough. We lose track of each other. So, Maya, what have you been up to? What's going on? And what are you drinking tonight?
Today, it's such a difference from last week where I was girl drink drunk and I was all coconut and rum. I am being a really basic bitch tonight. I have vodka. I have La Croix lemon flavor, and it's just vodka and soda.
Wait, you're drinking vodka and lemon flavored La Croix, and you're saying that's not a girl drink?
I'm not saying it's not a girl drink. I'm just saying it's not like a fancy drink. It's a very basic. Yeah, it's a basic bitch drink. I'm being basic tonight.
There's nothing wrong with that. More power to the basic bitches, I say.
You know, hey, and in terms of how I'm doing, it's interesting. Both my children went to what I call the Pete Seeger Socialist Love Commune Jewish school. And we had Shabbat on Friday morning, as we always do. It's Zoom Shabbat. And the director of the school, who's really amazing, said that she was talking to a friend and they decided the question is not, how are you doing? It's, how are you doing it?
That's good.
And I feel like, how am I doing it? I don't know. I'm trying real hard. And that's what I could say right now. How am I doing it? It's a very, there's still a pandemic on, guys. To be honest, I'm extraordinarily stressed out that all of these amazing people who are marching are all going to be filling up intensive care beds with COVID in a week and a half. It's keeping me up. It's super stressing me out. It's super stressing me out. Wear your masks, guys. Your Jewish mother is really worrying about you.
Maya is Jewish mother to all right now. I'm sure that people will be okay. I know they're wearing masks. I think it's going to be fine. You went to at least one protest, I know that.
I did, because I live near the mayor's mansion, so I walked to one protest that was there, but it was still very small. Everybody was wearing masks, but I didn't go for long because of COVID issues, because my parents are older and we're going to be seeing them. And it's super stressful to not be able to be out right now and to worry about the people who are. It's very, that's where I'm at.
It's everything is stressful. That is just our state of being now. Like I
So
thought before this that was our state of being, you know, it was just sort of like the Trump era stress, but this is it just keeps getting to whole new levels.
like lists of police brutality, like
Yeah.
that's what I'm reading all day. I can't do anything, get anything done. I'm just reading about the cops being fucking monsters. That's what I'm doing with my day.
Difficult. Yeah.
Alcohol helps. So how are you drinking and what are you doing?
So I am drinking what I'm gonna call an old fashioned.
Okay.
It's this new I'll show it because we are doing a live stream. It's this new whiskey that
Ooh.
I bought yesterday. Matt and I went to the liquor store and we found that they had a really interesting selection. It's a store we hadn't been to many times. This Fukano whiskey is made in Japan and it's made from rice. It's distilled from rice. Yeah, and aged, and this is the Fukano Vault Reserve. So it's a limited release, which these are the things that a person at a liquor store can say to us that will make us buy things. It's like,
Which they know. They know
of
this.
course
They
do.
know this.
But
Yeah.
but we like that. We like how excited they were to share their different products and talk about them and let us taste them even. So, you know, pro tip, if you're ever trying to sell me liquor, let me taste and I will buy. I'm going to buy anyway, but I like to have a taste. So I'm enjoying it, and I put a little bit of orange peel, like not orange peel, but orange slice in it, and I'm gonna have a little bit of bitters and call it an old fashioned.
And also you put a little bit of your blood. You put a little bit of your blood in it.
I was
It's
in
just
a
a
rush
little
to slice the orange. Part of why we were late in starting this stream. We were 15 minutes late. Part of that was technical difficulties. One of the technical difficulties was me slicing open my phone. I'm glad that amuses you. I am so glad that it is.
No, I just
freaking
heard this
entertaining.
yelp and I just think it's, you just flavor it with a little,
Yeah, that's an old trick I learned as a bartender.
you know.
When you're making an old fashioned, and they go, "Is that your blood?" You go, "No, that's cherry juice."
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And how's your general doing? How's your general you doing?
I'm doing fine. I took the last week off of work, like paid work, so that we could have a vacation, and that was, very relaxing and nice. So I actually feel kind of okay. Of course, that's relative. I say relaxing and nice. It's like I was freed from some of the personal stress in my life so that I had more time to just keep refreshing Twitter and look at all the stressful images of people being.
I know. God damn.
It's hard to actually relax in anyway, but it's good.
Wear your masks, guys.
Lots of stuff to talk
Well-
to my psychiatric nurse practitioner about.
So we just want to thank, briefly before we get into it, we want to thank our patrons.
Our patrons on
Patreon. Patreon.com/sauce podcast. You are keeping us going and we thank you so much. I hope you're listening to us. We love you. We love the emails we're getting from you. We love when you tell us what to do next. We love you and we hope that to keep doing your ideas very soon.
There's so much
The
to work through.
the contagious disease deep dive will continue. It is possible that it might be interrupted by a multi-part cops.
Yeah, well, we interrupted it to do this episode, which is going to be about protests, and specifically like civil rights protests and all kinds of stuff. But we also were thinking that it might be really interesting to talk about the police and the way they're depicted. in
Yeah,
culture, which is a
police
huge
and popular culture. It's huge. I can't believe we've never gotten to it, actually.
I know, right? I was thinking about it today just because I was seeing a lot of great threads on Twitter about defunding the police, abolishing police, and what that really means, and the ways. And I was thinking about the ways we conceive of police and policing and their role, and how much that's shaped by and influenced by less our personal experience, for some of us at least, and more like
100%.
if you happen to be privileged and not get harassed by the cops a lot, your main interaction with police could quite likely be, or your main knowledge of police, I mean to say, could quite likely just be what you've gleaned from TV and movies.
Well, but I think that's the other thing is that even the people who are harassed by police, it's countered with TV and movies and media. that just is constantly putting police in your face, like putting police
Yeah.
in your media face, like all the time.
Yes.
So
It's true, right?
we have a lot to talk about over the next month. Stay with us, support us, write to us.
Yes.
And
if you are
yeah,
interested in being part of our Patreon, you can go to patreon.com/saucepodcast and check out the different levels of membership and what's involved.
all right, let's get to it.
All right. Okay. So you want to start talking about our main topic? You want to get us
Let's
started?
do it. So today we wanted to talk about Black Lives Matter and the current protests, but we wanted to talk about it in terms of historical memory and why this moment feels different, or does it feel different? What are the events? What are the pictures in our head that make this moment possible? If we're going to look at the past 100 years, if we're going to look at the past 20 years, what readies us? What prepares us? What are the images that people are holding in their self, whether you know it or not, that are allowing this moment to be possible?
Well said. So I think we want to start by talking about a little bit about what has happened over the past 10, 15 years, really. Maybe a little longer than that, but relatively recent history. Because I think we're seeing in this week's protest activity and the Black Lives Matter marches and demonstrations across the country, around the world even,
Yep.
that something has shifted. There has been some kind of inflection point, and
We're seeing every massive corporation be like, we're sorry, we've been so racist. You're like, now
Roger
you're
Goodell
sorry.
apologized, like basically went back on his entire.
Did he apologize directly to Cap,
No,
though?
not
Because
directly to Cap,
yeah,
obviously.
yeah,
He apologized generally speaking, but sort of took responsibility in a sense and said that the NFL should be doing more to fight racism. And, like, he said a lot of good things that you never would have expected. I want to know what changed here.
right. And also, what gave him the words? Because what I see a lot of right now is people seem to have a certain kind of literacy, a certain kind of like verbal and conceptual literacy that allows them to participate in a way that I do not think they've had. And I think it's really important for us to just kind of briefly go through the moments that gave us the literacy for this moment, like how to protest and what all of that is. And I actually wanted to start with ACT UP. Larry Kramer, who started ACT UP, died. Thank God he got to live to his 80s and live out a big, long life. He was the founder of the Gay Men's Health Crisis. And then he thought the gay men's health crisis was not radical enough. He was like a privileged white gay man in his 40s. And he's like, all of the gay men's health crisis is like, how do we take care of the people who are already dying and be nicer to them as they die? And he's like, fuck this, we don't want to die. And he started ACT UP. I think it's important to note that Stonewall was a riot. Like, we are in this moment where gay marriage, all of these things are taken as a given. Stonewall was a riot. And I think Larry Kramer wanted that riotous spirit for ACT UP, treating this as an emergency. Our lives are in danger. We are trying to not die.
Yes. So I want to show an image. I don't have a lot of them for this, but I'm trying to find an image of ACT UP that is actually really great.
And so, by the way, just so you know, for those of you who've been following my Plague Archives on my Instagram, in honor of Larry Kramer, I put up a lot of these images, like ACT UP, or a splinter group of ACT UP called TAG, Target Action Group, putting a giant inflatable condom on the house of Jesse Helms, one of like the worst, most racist, sexist, homophobic senators of all time. Yeah. Like, when they demonstrated, they went fucking big.
Interesting. Well, the picture I have, I just put it in the planning document if you wanted to see, because it was
Yeah.
one that I came up with. It is the die-in
Yes.
demonstration. I thought that was relevant
Yes.
because Black Lives Matter has staged die-ins.
Yep.
And so you can see some influence right there. I'm sure, I don't know if
And
ACT UP came up with
that
that
was
number, but
that was a Wall Street protest. So what I think is important about ACT UP is that they were hugely theatrical,
mhm,
they were getting attention, and their targets were huge. And I think that sets us up for Occupy Wall Street, which we're going to get to.
yes.
They had 5,000 people at the Catholic Church. They targeted Wall Street. They targeted the FDA. They targeted the National Institute of Health. They weren't going to do these they were targeting the system itself
Mm,
that was keeping people with AIDS from getting the research they needed for the treatment they needed. And I feel like the huge radical scope of their performance is very important for so much of what follows.
well said. And I think generally speaking, that kind of leads into the topic of the LGBT rights movement, or also branches off it, as you mentioned, Stonewall. And I do think we have a generation of folks who grew up on that and have been prepped for this moment by watching the success of gay rights movement in real time.
And and ACT UP was successful. Like
Yeah,
they got the research money they wanted. Like they made it happen.
yeah.
So I think that there's something also about this moment. So we're going to go in chronological order of like the sort of recent history things that bring us to here. I just want to quickly note the end of communism.
Mm,
I think the tearing down statues, tearing down the Berlin Wall, like I have in here, God, I must have already been drinking, tearing down statues of Saddam. Like there's something about, which was not the end of communism, but there's something about tearing down the statues,
yes.
which has been super
Well,
exciting this week.
I added the thing in about Saddam
Oh, okay.
because I was thinking about at the really the beginning of the Iraq War, but after the Iraq initial invasion was successful in 2003, there was this moment that was on all the news where people gathered around the statue of Saddam and pulled it down with the help of American troops, and it was so staged. It was so clearly, deliberately staged to echo an image that we'd seen in the late 80s, early 90s with the fall of communism, and probably had been commonly seen with earlier liberation movements. So I can't cite specific examples off the top of my head. But that image of the people coming together to pull down the statue of the oppressive dictator, they were
Absolutely.
trying to create that moment artificially in that situation.
That's right. And so they were trying to recreate the pulling down of Stalin, the pulling down of
Right,
the
right,
wall
right.
itself, and this feeling that this thing that felt so permanent
Hmm.
is just suddenly evaporates and is done by the very force of the people.
Exactly.
So we have ACT UP, we have the end of communism. That gives us a lot of these pictures that are in our head that
Yes.
shows us the possibility of things. Um,
I
the
don't
next
have a picture for that for the viewers, but
they could Google it.
yeah, Google it. Anyway, what was the next thing?
So the next thing I wanted to mention was Hurricane Katrina.
Okay.
I think that was hugely, hugely important in this moment. I feel like so much of our literacy around Black Lives Mattering
Yeah.
happened in the Katrina moment. And I'm thinking specifically of when Kanye
Hmm.
went on TV during this big like telethon to raise money and all of a sudden got just so honest. It was
Uh,
a huge media moment.
should I show the clip?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to show a clip of that. This is Kanye. Now, the context for this is it was a fundraiser for
Hmm.
Hurricane Katrina.
That's right.
Okay. And he's on with Mike Myers, and they're supposed to be doing some kind of scripted exchange.
Yes.
All right, I'm going to play it.
Poor, the black people, the less well off as slow as possible. I mean, this is.
Hold on. I'm pausing it because I'm not 100% sure that the audio.
No, it's showing.
It's showing,
great.
but I don't know if the audio is going through to our listeners. So I'm just going to double check on that. Forgive me for doing this now. I'm just going to make sure that the audio,
It's working.
sound, audio devices. Just give me a sec.
It's super working.
Is it?
When you played it before on YouTube, it was super working.
Okay, I'm going to start it at the spot where I started it again then.
Great.
Poor, the black people, the less well off as slow as possible. I mean, this is Red Cross is doing everything they can. We already realize a lot of the people that could help are at war right now, fighting another way, and they've given them permission to go down and shoot us.
And subtle, but in even many ways more profoundly devastating, is the lasting damage to the survivors' will to rebuild and remain in the area. The destruction of the spirit of the people of southern Louisiana and Mississippi may end up being the most tragic loss of all.
George Bush doesn't care about black people.
Please call.
Should I stop it there?
Yeah.
In the past few
George
days,
Bush doesn't care about
America
black
thrived.
people. So so amazing. But
I mean, I'll tell you something. I knew he had said that, but I've never really watched that clip. And oh my God, Mike Myers' reaction in that moment is priceless.
it's amazing. And I think, but it was a huge media moment. It was huge. And I feel like there was something about Katrina where this whole fantasy of like, we're done, we're post-racial, like it just got destroyed by Katrina.
Yeah.
And I feel like Kanye's moment of such honesty was a huge media moment. It was so honest and it was so unscripted. And it was, I feel like that moment vibrates for like as a mass media moment.
I think so
Unbelievable.
too. And I think that there's a way in which, actually Matt phrased it this way. He said, the 9/11 era ended with Katrina. And I thought that was really apt. The years prior to that were that, 9/11 happened, and that kind of gave Bush a blank check. There was the Afghanistan war and the Iraq invasion, and everyone was sort of the gung-ho patriot. Even people who were against the Iraq war, there were protests, but it was all kind of muffled by this larger wave of we have to come together as a nation and so forth. And,
Yes.
That also was the time when like the Fox News bubble, the Republican media news bubble really started to expand and calcify. And there was something about what happened with Katrina that we could point to, that everyone could look at, and it was just undeniable what a disaster it had been, and how inequitably the disaster had been laid at the feet of black people. And I think it really did signal some kind of change in the way people were thinking about protesting the government.
Absolutely. And I think that set up for the next touch point in this moment, which is Occupy Wall Street.
Okay, I have an image for that. I'm showing the wrong one.
I think
show that one.
Occupy Wall Street prepared us in one way that you brought up in the decentralized leadership. So I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Yes, that's something that really set up a lot of what Black Lives Matter is doing. Instead of being a movement that had a single charismatic leader or even a small group of leaders, it wasn't about any individual. There was no leadership structure, in fact. It was completely decentralized. And while there were various, I guess, sort of chapters and sort of loosely organized smaller groups, all decisions were sort of made collectively. It was intended, it was done that way purposefully.
And there's this thing where like, and I know that I've mentioned this before, where often it's talked about how Republicans sort of are a pyramid. They set up such a great base structure that at the end they can put any idiot on top and the structure works. Often progressive movements and Democrats specifically have depended on, they're like the inverted pyramid. They rest on the charismatic leader.
Yes.
And so if the charismatic leader fails, it all falls apart. So I think Occupy was really important in that, where it was like, we're not doing the charismatic leader. We are doing like,
Yeah, they did that deliberately, and it underlined that this was a populist movement, that this was about the people. And I will say that I'm just resizing the window of our chat. Sorry, viewers, for the jerky view, but I just wanted to fix that. I think Occupy created kind of a cultural shift that's really important. Even though I'm not sure that it accomplished any specific policy goals, if it even had any to articulate, but the language, the rhetoric, and the concepts that were being voiced, it gave a really specific vocabulary to them, like the 99%. And just the whole conversation about wealth inequality, and that
absolutely.
Yeah. The
Absolutely.
ways in which regular working people, wages were stagnating, all of that stuff was not really being talked about in mainstream political discourse prior to Occupy. And now it's a regular part of it, at least on the Democratic side.
And the moment when we're talking about literacy, like how are these different movements providing us or a more diverse group? I mean, there's a march happening right now for George Floyd in Santee, California, formerly known as Klantee. Okay. Like, what is the literacy of this moment? Oh shit, we sure do. Home of the Museum of whatever, of Scientific Creation Science.
You went there.
Multiple times.
I remember you telling me all about it in high school.
Oh my God. So a place where the literacy of the 99% of Occupy Wall Street, how did it prepare us? When Mitt Romney, when he was running against Obama, had audio from a secret fundraiser talking about the 47% of people who just don't want to work or whatever. Right. Occupy Wall Street prepared the general public to have literacy in that moment, to be like, that is bullshit. That is the 99% talking. Absolutely. We were ready for that moment because of Occupy. And similarly, I think we are ready for this moment because of Ferguson and Black Lives Matter. Yes. Like, people are like, why weren't we ready 5 years ago? I think, why didn't Katrina make us ready for Ferguson is a totally legit question. But for sure, Ferguson, the death of Trayvon Martin, I Can't Breathe, Say His or Her Name, that's what...
It really started, literally it started with the acquittal, Zimmerman's acquittal.
That's right.
For Trayvon Martin's murder. That's when the hashtag Black Lives Matter came to be. Alicia Garza, I always in my head say Alicia, but I'm actually not sure how she pronounces it. And others came together, created that hashtag. And from there, they then created a sort of network that, similar to Occupy, is decentralized, and you can create your own chapter. They only ask that you commit to the essential principles, but the chapters are locally run because they really believe in that kind of locally community-driven type of activism. And you can see the influences from movements like ACT UP in the direct action and the kind of rhetoric we're seeing now, though I'm jumping ahead to now, with like abolishing police or defunding police, that idea that you're addressing the institutional problem. You're not asking
Yes.
for reform. You're not asking for there to be as many black billionaires as there are white billionaires, because that would be
That's right.
equal. You're recognizing the need for top to bottom, or bottom to top rather, reform. That came out of that moment. Really, it like all sort of sparked from that moment of Zimmerman's acquittal. As a side note, I think it's worth pointing out that many white nationalists and basically, Nazis cite that moment as the moment of their radicalization. The whole Trayvon Martin, maybe not the acquittal, but the Trayvon Martin incident, the media's reaction to it and Barack Obama's reaction to it. It was really kind of the moment when Barack Obama stopped being, when he started being black in the eyes of a lot of white people.
I mean, I think what's also interesting for that, and I want to bring this up because I feel like the rhetorical strategies of Black Lives Matter, when they say his name, where they are so focused on making sure that people acknowledge the name and the humanity of people who are victims of cop violence, of white violence. Say their name, inscribe personhood on them.
Yes.
And I feel like one of the things that I thought about this week that I feel like is a huge part of this, when Obama ran the first time, there was a team ready to immediately respond to any potential swift voting. Like any rhetorical, Obama did this, like they had a team. And I think that there is this way that the activism of Black Lives Matter makes it so that there are a lot of people who are ready to be like, that's bullshit. Those statistics are bullshit. Like, we're not doing that old story. We're not telling that old story. And I feel like that's part of this moment.
I messed up the visuals, you guys. I'm sorry.
Aw.
I'm terrible. Say that again, because I was distracted by what I was doing.
Oh, I was just talking about when Obama ran and had a sort of rapid response team, so they'd be ready for any swift voting nonsense. There's a way that there's this rapid response where when a bullshit narrative comes out, like the usual story, there are so many people who are now ready to be like, no, that is not the statistic. And let me tell you why that is not the statistic. Like, I feel like Black Lives Matter created a scaffolding, like created the base of the pyramid to let us be here right now.
Yeah, I think that's very, very well said. And I also want to reiterate the power of slogans, not just the say his or her name, which has its own power, but I can't breathe, no justice, no peace, those hands up, don't shoot. And also Colin Kaepernick's kneel, which has been really visible recently. These visual and verbal shorthands that people can use to evoke all of these ideas. They have a vocabulary now.
Yes.
That helps them participate.
There's a huge vocabulary that is in place that's due to the ongoing, often very boring work that community activists do day in and day out, that Occupy did, that Black Lives Matter did, that a lot of Bernie supporters did. I never give Bernie credit or his supporters credit, but it's true. They did a lot of the scaffolding that allows people to have a vocabulary so that they can enter right in. There's a grammar that has been established. It's a literacy that has been established. I also think, just briefly, I don't even need to get into it, but I think in terms of visual images or media images, I think Arab Spring was huge.
Yeah.
Like, whether we feel it or not, the kind of instantaneous feeling of like a brush fire of Arab Spring was huge. And I think that with that, the Women's March, the anti-Second Iraq War marches, like all of those, the sort of tinder spark fire and all of a sudden millions of people out on the street, I think that all prepared us for right now.
I agree. And I think finally in this vein, it's worth mentioning that this pandemic, this whole coronavirus situation, I think really has contributed to to putting people in this place in this moment where they're ready to march. I mean, yeah, you have the Women's March, the March for Our Lives, right? The people came out to march for family separation, against family separation.
Absolutely.
People came out to march against the Muslim ban. Like, we've learned how to do that in recent years more and more. And I think there's an extent to which people were feeling weary of it. But when you take the sort of awareness of wealth inequality from Occupy Wall Street and the increased belief in the effectiveness of political action from the past 3 years and all these other forces we've been discussing, and then you have the situation of this economic shutdown that has just revealed so clearly how vulnerable so many people are and how there is no safety net in place to take care of anybody. It just sort of puts a point on everything and got people out into the streets.
That's right. And the increased literacy that is due to the assiduous, daily, often very tedious work by many Black writers, activists, culture makers to constantly just educate people, even when it's not their fucking job. But they did it anyway. And I think that education is like, it's really paying off. It's really paying off.
I'm so fascinated by that. It's really amazing to me to see white people just kind of showing up and sort of seeming to understand better their role as allies. I mean, I heard this one woman on NPR, like she was doing the call-in show with Brian Lehrer, and I was doing other things, and I just sort of heard it, and I wasn't completely paying attention to the conversation, but I heard her say, you know, our job was there to protect Black people from the police. Like, she was talking about them physically getting their bodies in the way to protect Black people from the police. And I just thought that was very interesting to hear someone so clearly understand one of her roles as an ally.
Well, it's also, we've often spoken about how Reagan led to the rise of this. I mean, Nixon into Reagan, I know there's Jimmy Carter in there, but Nixon into Reagan was all about this attempt to make Americans not believe in sort of collectivity or systemic problems, to be like, it's just you're just not working hard enough or whatever. And I think all of this work, Katrina, Occupy, Ferguson, all of these, the Arab Spring, it's all about reinscribing that there is a collective responsibility and a systemic in how these things go. And I feel like you're seeing people all of a sudden get to re-step into that language and understand that.
It's true. And watching, you know, as left-wing as MSNBC is or whatever, they're better than others in this regard. But they don't often talk about things in such direct terms as like, hey, you're white, you need to examine your privilege. They're doing that now. CNN is doing that. Like, it's become mainstream to understand this as a systemic problem. And I think it's a kind of progress that even Donald Trump is talking about how sad what's his name? I can't do names. That was murdered in Minneapolis.
George Floyd? Oh God, that's right.
I can't do names. So even Trump is tweeting about how tragic George Floyd's death is, and it's just awful, and those cops are going to have to pay the price. Like, we've moved to somehow to some kind of place where they're no longer even trying to say, well, he was no angel, or pretend it didn't happen, or pretend it was justified, or it was no big deal, or it's not commonly happening. They're anything short of actually admitting that it's systemic and that radical systemic change is needed. But I think it's actually a huge step that people are acknowledging the tragedy of it, that George Floyd's funeral was on every network, or every news network anyway. Like, that was news. We haven't
And
seen that
also,
evidence.
but also, I think that the shooting at Mother Emanuel was a part of that. I
Yeah,
mean, I
yeah,
feel like that was also a huge moment. So one thing that we wanted to do, so now we're going to sort of shift a little bit,
yes.
just for a second. One thing we wanted to talk about with you guys, because obviously this is what we're interested in, is like, what do we mean when we talk about historical memory? Like we
Yeah.
just talked about all the accretion of images that bring us to be ready right now.
Yeah.
There's a way that we want to talk about how historical memory, how we remember history, is different than actual history.
Yeah. In the interest of looking at how our understanding of what's happening right now with this movement, you could call it Black Lives Matter movement, how that is being informed by historical memory, for good or for ill, how it is
That's right.
shaping how we perceive what's going on. I think an interesting place to start with this would be that Time magazine cover that I put in the document. Did you see it?
Yeah, but where'd it go?
I don't
Got
know.
deleted.
Oh, did it? Do you remember what it
Yeah.
was? Okay. I'm going to show it to the viewers.
Yes.
So it's a magazine cover from 2015. And, oops, I'm moving the wrong thing. Sorry. This Time cover is from 2015. And it's referring to the protests that were happening at the time. And you can see it has this headline, America 1968. 1968 is crossed out and then replaced with 2015. What has changed,
Yeah.
what hasn't. And there's this photograph of one black person running away from an army of police.
Yep.
So obviously the premise there is to draw parallels between the civil rights movement of the 60s and now, or 2015, which is
Right.
close enough to being now. And so I think that puts us in a position to ask what culturally we think of when we're thinking about that civil rights movement of the past.
I mean, and I think part of that, like, look at just, there are two things that I want to mention in terms of like historical memory
Yes.
examples, right? One of them is,
Can I interrupt you for just a second?
yeah,
And just to be clear, we didn't exactly explain what we meant by historical memory.
so go for it.
Okay, so when we talk about historical memory, we're not necessarily talking about history, what actually happened, or history in the sense of the study of history, but rather the way that collectively people think of history, which is often not real. Like, how many of us were taught growing up that Columbus discovered America? That's historical memory. As far as many Americans were concerned for decades and decades, centuries, I don't even know how long, Columbus discovered America. Regardless of the truth of it, that was what we remembered as a society.
Right. And I feel like a great place to start is the cult of Martin Luther King Jr. itself.
Yeah.
Like Martin Luther King Jr., in one of his beautiful, there's this biography by David Garrison that's amazing about the Southern, the SCLC and MLK and all of his work. He spent a year, this is after Montgomery, this is after the big civil rights march on Washington. He spent a year in a town called Albany, Georgia, and failed. This was in the middle of the 60s. He spent a year there trying to do in Albany, Georgia, what had happened in Montgomery, what had happened with Selma, and he failed. He went to Chicago and failed. Like, he was doing the work, the real work. He was joining with poor people. He was making this a poor people's march. People hated him. But our historical memory almost ends in the 63 civil rights march. And it's not the work that he did. Like, all of his work that failed because the systemic problems were just too deep are not how we historically remember him, but they are history. And a lot of how we think of him in his historical memory is that after he died, Coretta Scott King put a lot of energy and a lot of juice behind making him this figure for civil rights in this very specific way that did not acknowledge the radical nature of a lot of his work. I think that another example, obviously, because we're seeing all these statues come down, what are the Confederate statues? The Confederate statues didn't happen as a result of the Confederacy. The Confederate statues happened decades after the Civil War ended, in times of a lot of tension around race, for white supremacists to say, our version of history is what's going to be remembered. So when people try to defend the Confederate statues, a lot of them were put up at moments of civil rights movements. They're not historical statues.
Right.
They're the attempt to co-opt historical memory.
To create, exactly. And so often that, I mean, my example is at the actual Gettysburg Address. Because the Gettysburg Address, like, I don't know even the exact date that the Gettysburg Address was given, but if I'm not mistaken, the war wasn't even over yet. And they were establishing a memorial at Gettysburg. And that was very, there was, you can see in the speech a very keen awareness of the way that you can create history. That it's almost like that winners tell the history, that lovely old saying, because Lincoln and the Union understood that they could control not only the narrative, but like the history, the way this would be remembered for generations to come. They were deliberately trying to shape a narrative.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's what the Confederate statues are. And it's very interesting that A.G. Bill Barr, who's been doing all kinds of disgusting, corrupt, horrifying things, when he's recently been asked about this, like, how's history going to remember you? He's like, history is written by the winners.
Yeah, you said that earlier.
And no, I said that earlier when we were talking, not in the show. I didn't mention Bill Barr. Yeah, not yet. Wow. So I feel like that's something that's interesting. The fight for historical memory, especially in terms of race, is interesting. That's something that we see all across the South with like when I lived in the South, this fantasy of before, of how people want to have like tours of plantation homes, and like, we want to imagine this before that was totally dependent on slavery. They're trying to co-opt historical memory in a really specific way. And that's, so we're talking about like, so for this next section, it's like, what are the moments of historical memory that are at play, like right now?
So I think it's interesting to note that the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s came into being when TV was a pretty new thing.
Yeah.
And it was one of the first major events or social movements to be covered by television news. And that was important to the movement in a lot of ways. And it's interesting also that the movement was aware of that. They were aware of what kind of image they had to shape. For example, Rosa Parks was not just a woman who happened to be tired of sitting at the back of the bus and just suddenly stood up for herself. She was an activist, but activist groups agreed that she would be a good sort of standard bearer. She would be the right person to make this move to set off this boycott, because she was unobjectionable in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And I have images for this. This is going to be fun. Now I have some real images. Civil rights. We've got Rosa Parks. I have to sorry, guys. Rosa Parks. There she is. There she is, getting photographed, getting her fingerprints taken as she's being arrested. It's a very deliberate, she's got her nice little 50s hat on. That was 56? You also see early on in the civil rights movement, when you had the desegregation of schools and things like that, We have, here's a nice image of Elizabeth, what was her name? Eckford? Elizabeth Eckford in 1957 going to a white school. She's desegregating, and all the white, mostly girls behind her shouting at her. It's an iconic image. And I think that's what a lot of us think of when
Yeah.
we think of the civil rights movement, which is kind of interesting, because it certainly didn't start with the Montgomery bus boycott.
Oh my God,
We think
not
of it
at all.
like it did. Like there was nothing, and then there was the bus boycott, and
And then there was Selma, and it just like
yeah, exactly.
totally. And I think that like that's also part of what's really interesting about the past week, where all of a sudden you're like, there's this weird script of like, there's a protest and then there's looting and then they call in the National Guard. Like
Right.
this sort of weird, like 1, 2, 3 step of that. That's very much from the 60s. Like that's
Yeah.
that's such a like we're living back in the 60s. And I feel like and there's this really interesting somebody wrote on Twitter, like, and it super called me out, and I had a super little Karen moment where somebody's like, why does everybody keep talking about how the protests are peaceful? It's like, it's so anti-Black because you're just sitting there like
Yeah.
peaceful, like Hunter's Orange, like don't shoot, we're peaceful. But part of that language, it's so in the historical memory. Is this a peaceful protest?
Yes. Oh, totally. I've been noticing that all week. Like that phrase "peaceful protest" irritates the shit out of me. It's like, and people are using it. So, oh, this is a peaceful protest. The news are using it constantly to differentiate that it's not that kind of protest where they burn down the police station, which is like pretty rad. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's super rad. It's super rad.
It was so
It's great.
I mean, as Malcolm X often said, and I'm obviously paraphrasing, but like when you are being attacked, when violence is being used against you and your community, what's wrong with a violent response? I mean,
that's right.
I'm anti-violence. I don't believe in a violent response personally, but the whole ethic of our entire country is that you are justified to use violence in response to
absolutely
a violent attack.
But there is a way that one of the things that exists when people go peaceful protest is the white fear that was triggered by Malcolm X,
Yes.
by the Black Panthers, by and this was something that I think is very important for us to remember. I think that the initial civil rights movement really felt like if we change the laws, it's going to change things. And when they saw how entrenched and how deep and how unfixable this was, it led to more radical Black movements. And still, we think of these as violent movements. These were not violent movements. The Black Panthers were feeding kids breakfast, and that program of just giving children nutrition in Oakland was considered by J. Edgar Hoover the most radical, dangerous thing in the whole world.
I thought I had a picture. Okay, I'm sorry, viewers. I just made us disappear because I thought I had a picture of a Life magazine cover from the 60s. That was okay. No, it's here. I found it. Okay, wait, you guys. So here's the Life cover. It says Negro Revolt. The flames spread. And yeah. And then I have some pictures from the interior of the magazine that show Detroit in flames, and it just says big block letters Detroit. And another image of a cop, this lone 60s looking cop with this little revolver trying to guard somebody's store, and it says city at the blazing heart of a nation in disorder. So that's just the sort of imagery of civil unrest
that's
we're
right.
operating from.
And it comes from the place of white fear, because it's saying like
Yes,
they're going and I think that comes back again in terms of our historical memory with the 1992 uprising, or what is also known as the LA riots,
The LA
right?
riots, yeah.
So the uprising, riots, race riots, call in the National Guard. These people go crazy, and then you have to call in the National Guard, and militarization is the only option. I
Right.
feel like we've been getting so much of that, and we see it just as much in everybody being like, it was a peaceful protest, it was a peaceful protest, as we do in the
Yes.
actual moment of opportunistic looting and
And
violence.
100% there is this misremembering of MLK and who he was and what he stood for. And I would even say misappropriation.
Yes. Yes.
Like it's I mean but the misappropriation is so cartoonish that I don't even want to mention it, because it's like people who are obviously racist bringing up MLK as an example, and clearly
Yes. Yes.
like they don't give a shit about black people. But they there's still, I think, like this really dominant idea in the culture of him as being so associated with passive resistance and peaceful protest. And it's like people remember that he said, I have a dream, that my children will be judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. And then that's all he ever said. You know what I mean? Like, individual bias will disappear and people will all just get along. Isn't that his message? Like, that's what gets carried forward, I think. And
That's the historical memory.
I
Yeah.
think a lot of that may have to do with white people trying to teach kids about it and not having a way to simplify big ideas about racism. So it's like, he taught us all that you shouldn't judge people by the color of their skin.
That's right.
And,
That's right.
And then no one ever explores the ideas beyond that.
Well, I think that it would require people to sit with discomfort. And I think that's really hard.
Yes.
And I think that it's the sort of ongoing work of this, the nonstop work of this, the accretive, iterative work of this is really, that's something that's hard in American culture. America wants to be like, fix it.
Yeah.
It's like, fix it is ongoing.
Here's an image of the Black Panthers with their weapons.
Oh, I think about it. This was famous. Like, Ronald Reagan put gun control in place because they showed up in Sacramento with their guns, which they had every legal right to show up with. And so now you have all these like white supremacists and Second Amendment. It's like, yeah, see what you think about the Second Amendment when like Black people are carrying guns openly.
I also want to go back to what you said about the LA uprising / LA riots. And that linguistic, semantic difference is really struck me, because now people call Stonewall the Stonewall uprising. But until quite recently, it was the Stonewall riots.
Riot.
So it makes me wonder when we will get to the point where we're talking about the Watts uprising, and the LA uprising.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And by the way, everybody, Anna Deavere Smith's Twilight 1992, which is about the uprising, which was her one-woman show, which is so amazing, is going to be put on the air. Like, they're going to be showing it again, like free streaming for anybody really soon. You should all watch it because it's amazing. Ooh, I'll find it. I'll put it on our Twitter. It's so good. But I feel like there is that recapturing of the historical imaginary. And this is like the one last point that I wanted to mention in terms of how are we ready? How are we ready? Why are we ready now? Right?
Yeah.
And I feel like something we have to talk about is the rise of streaming media and the rise of social media. I feel like streaming media needs so much content. And for Netflix, if they're reaching some tiny, it's not like 3 channels where if you don't reach everybody, you're screwed.
Right.
They're happy to reach what would be a niche audience.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, all of these, and I would say in the past 5 years, in order to reach niche audiences of queers or women or people of color or Black people versus Asians or whatever, all of these extraordinarily talented people are getting the opportunity to make media for their niche audiences but a lot of it is really fucking good. So everybody watches it. And I feel like it's transforming the imagination of the American public. I feel like that's a huge part of what makes us ready for this moment, is that we watch Atlanta and that we watch Insecure and that we watch all of these shows, which in an earlier editorial era would never have gotten, people would not have access to that media.
I think that's very true. And I think also with the social media aspect of things, I don't think it could even be understated. I mean, number one, you have smartphones and you have the ability to video and get a recorded video record of these police abuses, which sadly, Black people talking about their lived experiences for years and years has not been enough, but you get it on video and people start to actually see it. But beyond that, the whole thing like really did start from this hashtag on Twitter, on social media.
That's right.
And that allowed folks with very little platform, people who were community organizers, had a platform within their communities to reach globally and to get their message out globally and to resonate with all the people around the world who might be receptive to it. And we all watched the Ferguson protests, at least I did. You probably did, on social media. It wasn't
That's
really
right.
on the news, or what I was seeing on the news was, some aspect of it, like, oh, they're looting a Walgreens or something. But on social media, I could get stories from people on the ground in the moment talking
That's
about
right.
what they were seeing and what was happening.
That's
the
right.
Police abuses they were enduring, and pictures and video right there. And that's gone on since then. And it's been
Yep.
so key, I feel like, in this moment when the protests began in Minneapolis, and they were violent in the sense of like property damage, for sure.
Yeah.
And some of that, I still contend, was agitators, like anti-protest agitators.
Absolutely.
And some of it was just people taking advantage of the situation, and some of it was people are fucking pissed off and they wanted to burn down a police station, which I get. But since then, it's been this series of people reporting their experiences. I have not seen news coverage of people losing their eyes from those quote unquote rubber bullets.
That's right.
The 40 millimeter rounds that are covered in rubber, they're not rubber bullets. They're potentially lethal and very damaging weapons. And I didn't even know about that. I would not have known that about rubber bullets,
Yeah.
but I read it on Twitter today.
Yeah.
And that the ability to inform people and give a voice to folks who are not being interviewed or getting their voice on the TV or print media or whatever mainstream media people used to turn to. And also that I forgot what I was going to say about social media. It's just, it's been a game changer, I think, the whole thing, this was the thing. The question about how white people know how to be allies. So much of that is, we've been reading about it on Twitter for a long time. It's been, I've been on Twitter since like 2010. It's been about 10 years. And I've learned a lot just from reading tweets from people from different
I'm
backgrounds.
thinking about like geniuses who I've found, like I think about Black Twitter and specifically women writers who I follow, for whom Twitter became a place where their brilliance got to shine, and then they ended up with book deals. If it had just been the old editorial system of them directly to book deals, it wouldn't have happened.
Never.
But you have people like Mickey Kendall, who just came out with Hood Feminism.
Yes.
You have Tressie McMillan Cottom Thick, which is like as profound a work of theory has come out about race and gender in the past like 50 years. Feminista Jones, all of these women who are legit geniuses.
Yeah.
And there's the space for them to play out ideas, to work through ideas publicly, be part of discourse, and have people get educated and learn. And you even have this moment that could never have happened like in the 80s when we were growing up, where people are saying, hey, some of the emotional labor you're making us do is even having to explain this shit to you.
Right.
We don't want to have to explain this shit to you. Go fucking Google it and do the work.
But the number of white people I see saying like, we have to fix this.
That's right.
We have to do something about it. We would not be there. We would not be here.
That's right.
If not
That's right.
for the work that the women you mentioned and others, so many others, have been doing. And so much of it has been on social media, online, on various platforms. The way that allows people to connect and get those messages across.
But also, I think streaming media, because the documentaries that it makes possible, and also the fiction that it makes possible.
Yes. The creative voices.
Art is about.
Yeah.
Art is about, like, I'm, as somebody who does like social practice, like, I don't think art changes shit. I think laws do, and protests do, and news does by bringing the disinfectant of sunlight onto issues. I don't think art actually fixes things. But what art does that nothing else can do is make people understand differently or see things differently.
Right.
And when you have all of these very brilliant culture makers making shows where all of a sudden you're forced not into a Black person doing the the Black version of the white sitcom. You're pushed into entirely different worlds, different characters. I think that the imaginative worlds that is opened up for people makes people ready for this moment. Like, and
I totally agree. A good example of that I've always said is Ellen. Ellen came out in what, like 97?
Yeah.
It was right. I mean, granted, there had been a long social movement since, and political movement since Stonewall, and even before that, and there were many activists, and I don't want to put everything on Ellen's up, but what I want to say is that she created a little bit of a turning point culturally that allowed a turning point politically and socially to happen.
That's right. That's right.
And sometimes you need that. You need people to see that there's a person they like who is gay. You need people to be able to watch a show and relate to a Black person. And what they're going through. Like, you need them to care about what happens to Poussey at the end of season 4. Is it season 4? Orange is the New Black. You've never watched Orange.
Right.
You did watch it.
But also to be in a side world of like Atlanta, like Donald Glover,
right.
where it's just super, like, you're in another world. You're in another imaginative world. You're being invited into this other world. And I think just the last thing that I want to toss out there that I think allows this moment to happen, and this is actually part of that thing where it's like these new worlds of storytelling allow this to be possible, is that I think progress, I'm seeing a lot right now, a lot of internecine warfare between people. Like, are you progressive enough? Are you radical enough? These people aren't radical enough. This is a very, like, in terms of historical memory, progress happens not despite the fact that people are in different places along the spectrum of radicalism. It happens because of that. It happens because of the debate between NAACP, which was seen as establishment and caping, and then you have SCLC, which was kind of in the middle, and then SNCC, which was super radical, and the Panthers, who were really radical. Like, that conversation is what moves things forward. You have the feminist movement where you have women who just want to be the female version of like men's power. And then you have radical separatists who are like, we're going to be lesbians, not because that's where our erotic taste is, but because
it's a political statement.
It's a political statement to not fuck men. Like, versus like total third world suffrage, like that conversation is the progress. And I feel like it only works if we have the space for the worlds of the most radical imagination. Like Minneapolis is discussing defunding like
Yeah.
entirely
But that's that's why we are where
Yeah.
we are now. Like, you know, there's this fantasy of MLK as this all good, all respectable,
respectful.
all
Yeah.
peace guy. And Malcolm X was the, ooh, he hated white people. That's bad because you're not supposed to hate based on the color of someone's skin.
Yeah.
Right? And but in reality, they both understood that they were both a necessary part of the movement. MLK
Absolutely
100% understood that, and that both moved the movement forward, and that's true of any movement, any revolution in history.
Absolutely.
There's always that group that are more extreme and more radical, and they push the liberal centrists or whatever it might be forward, they're necessary to
Absolutely.
to keep those who are closer to power from becoming complacent.
And every once in a while you have like an AOC who gets elected, who gets to be the corridors of power with her bigger, more expansive imagination.
Yes.
And so I feel like that lands us with like all the work is part of the work. What's interesting is like, where are you in that spectrum? Well, what's the work that you are doing, and what's your sort of role in that discourse?
What is your contribution in that progress forward? Just don't worry about what other people's contribution is or isn't. Do yours.
Do yours, even if it's just being like white girls on YouTube talking about the social, political, cultural history
right?
of historical imagination and protest.
On YouTube and any podcast platform you prefer.
That's right. All right, guys. Thank you so much for being with us.
Yes.
We love you. We love our listeners.
You.
We went on for a little while.
We did. We always do. But actually, we weren't too bad. Our stream's only at 1 hour and 12 minutes almost at this point, which is for us not so bad. I want to give a quick shout out to Jeff Winbush in the comments, who says, "Hey there, I'm a newbie here, but I joined your Patreon and I'm subscribing to your podcast."
All right.
Welcome, Jeff. We're so glad to have you.
And thank you, James Fisk, who says that he's thrilled to support us both. We're thrilled to have your support. And we are going to be back with more about the social imaginary and cops. We're going to be back with more. There's still a fucking pandemic on. Guys, I'm so stressed out. We're masks.
So we're going to do one about policing and just the way that pop culture affects how we think about the role of police, because we have to talk about that. And we have to try to make it one episode. We also are going to do post-apocalyptic contagious disease movies. I have watched all 3 versions of I Am Legend.
All right, I'll get there. Oh fuck, I'll get there, guys.
I want you to watch them because they're kind of amazing. It's going to be really good conversation. So stay tuned. We're going to try to do live streams. Maybe we'll do it every Sunday.
I'd love to do that. Yes.
If we could do it Sundays, we'll try to do it every Sunday. It's a good night.
And
I think.
Guys, remember, if you can't protest for health reasons, you can donate money. You can amplify Black voices.
Yes.
You can you can do like mutual aid. Like there are a lot of ways to help. Find your way. And
we posted a link on the Twitter and it's also on the website with the previous episode we did with a link with suggestions of ways to help, places you can donate, stuff you can do. We'll keep posting anything we come across that seems helpful.
And if there's something you want us to ruin that's going to help us in this moment, even if it's like guys, there's this new show called Sweet Magnolias that I'm going to have to ruin deeply. I might take some of our very, useful time to talk about this show. Like we will ruin just pleasurable, just even for your pleasure. Like ask us, we'll do it.
Yeah, but we already have many things we have to get to.
I know. I know.
First,
Ugh.
share your thoughts about the stuff we've already been ruining. We want to hear your thoughts about contagious disease movies. We want to hear your thoughts about the current protests. What is happening? What is different now that is making white people do such a good job? Relatively speaking. I mean, we're always graded on a curve.
It's all relative, yeah.
But we'd love to hear your thoughts on that or anything else you've noticed about the current moment, the news cycle, whatever it may be. You can reach us via email. We are saucepodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on the Twitter and Instagram and maybe TikTok soon. Because I understand
You can.
Maya's going to do a Beyonce.
No,
thing.
I'm sorry, Megan the Stallion. Actually, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do Missy Elliott TikTok challenge.
Well, you
I am.
better get to that.
I know.
Also, anyway, we're at Sauce Podcast on all those platforms, except TikTok. We're not on there.
Yeah, I'm not yet. You can find me at Maya Garance. Anywhere you're looking for Maya Garances. The Plague Archives continues. So at Plague Archives, the Plague Archives on Instagram. And we're going to keep, this week, I did a lot of plague related to this amazing book called Infectious Fear, which is about TB. Tuberculosis was actually known as the White Plague. And yes, and it's a whole book about the ways that systemic racism had an impact on the public health work of taking care of TB patients in Baltimore. It's about the history of like Black people having TB in the first half of the 20th century in Baltimore. It's an amazing book. So I've been there last week. It was all ACT UP stuff in honor of Larry Kramer. So come join the Plague Archives as well.
And you can find me as at Gynostar on all the social media platforms, including TikTok.
And we will be seeing all of you very soon. We love our listeners. We'll see you soon.
Adios, amoebas. We're done.
All right, baby.